There's more questions than answers, but we'll help each other. What I want to just do in the little bit of time we've got is think through some of the really salient current challenges when you're working with that co-occurrence of gender diverse, gender dysphoric young people, but also on the autism spectrum. And for me, particularly when that turns up, the gender diversity turns up in adolescence, in that period that we might have referred to as rapid onset. And I'm just seeing it more and more and more in my own clinical practice. So we already know that there's been a significant rise in recent years in the presentation to gender clinics. That's certainly true of Australia. I think Australia is probably becoming a bit of an outlier in certain ways that I'll describe in a moment. We're certainly seeing that rise in biological females more so than males. And that's a bit of a conundrum that I don't think we've got a good explanation for why that disparity is there, but we've got it. Autism prevalence, I mean, I've spent most of my career specialising in the early identification and diagnosis of autism, and then a little bit later working with gender diverse young people. They used to be two different populations pretty much. Now it's very common for them to be presenting in the same person. But in my training, it was about 1 in 100, the prevalence of autism, and it's still a pretty stable global figure, but it's also on the increase in terms of prevalence. So 1 in 30-ish is probably a common Western figure at the moment, but in Australia something's going on because it can be as high as 1 in 23 as the prevalence rate for ASD. We've talked a lot today about prevalence and why things might be increasing and what might be behind it. I think, again, Australia is a bit of a unique story because here, if we break it down into age brackets, you can see that it is that pubertal, pre-pubertal, pubertal group who have got the biggest increase, and they're the ones that represent up to a ratio of about 1 in 23 in that 10 to 14 age group. Is there a reason for it? At its most pragmatic, yes, in Australia there is. We have a thing called the National Disability Insurance Scheme. It is the scheme that pays lots and lots of money for young people with a disability, and the group that has grown the largest in that scheme since its inception, it's relatively new. How old would it be? 4 or 5 years? Yeah, it's relatively new, but it's worth billions of dollars, is actually this group of 7 to 13, 14-year-old young people diagnosed with ASD. So in that period of time, the rate of diagnosis has also gone through the roof. And there's probably a correlation between those two things because the diagnosis is worth money, funding money, support money. So much so that the government have now announced as of June next year, guess what group are being taken out of the National Disability Insurance Scheme? Any poor young person diagnosed with ASD under 9 or 10 years of age is just being taken off, lock, stock and barrel, because the prevalence rate has gone up so much the country can't afford it. When we look at the co-occurrence of ASD and gender dysphoria, putting the two groups together, meta-analyses show that around about 11%, 1 in 10 is a common figure. Again, if we think about some of the things that have already been said this morning, there is this phenomena where it's more than that. There's a lot more sort of non-diagnosed ASD adolescents who are in the mix also of gender dysphoria or gender diversity. And when you look at some of the studies that have looked at not just the diagnosed population, but they've looked at those who probably would be, they just haven't been through the ASD diagnostic process yet, that's about 20 to 25%. So there is genuinely something going on where there is this phenomenal increase both in the presentation of gender diversity, gender dysphoria in adolescent populations, but also either ASD or ASD merely or ASD light or something is going on, but it's still got those ASD core quirky features. And that's where it becomes really challenging clinically because it's hard enough working with gender diverse adolescents, particularly, in context of what do you do therapeutically? Obviously, you can't treat them because it's not a disorder, and they don't need treatment because they have a certain gender identity, but they've got a lot of things going on in life that somebody needs to be able to talk sense to them about, that they will listen to and process. When you add the complexity of ASD or close to ASD in the same young person, then of course that's a challenge sitting in your consulting room, knowing what do we do next, what's beneficial, how can we help them and still validate them to the extent that they should be validated, but do something productive. The stats before, there is no good theory, I don't think at the moment, that can make perfect sense of why the co-occurrence is there and why it has risen so much. But something else is going on that I want to throw into the mix, and everyone's alluded to it today, so it won't be news to you. But they're being groomed, not in the traditional sense, but digitally, by algorithms designed to manipulate their identity. TikTok, YouTube, Reddit, Discord, these platforms aren't just where they hang out, they're the loudest voices in your child's life right now. And those voices, they're smart, slick, often disguised as funny, motivational. But what they're really doing is this: hijacking your child's need for identity, certainty, and connection, and selling them a worldview. Think about that phrase. Selling them a worldview. It starts with jokes, then it becomes identity, then it becomes worldview. Right now, they're under pressure to be someone and fast. Online, there's no room for uncertainty, no space to figure it out slowly. So they start trying on identities like outfits, seeing what gets a reaction, what makes them feel powerful, what helps them belong. That's not evil, it's just survival. And when you think about the context of ASD adolescents and their social alienation and their difficulty making and sustaining friendships, having a sense of belonging, and you add what has occurred in terms of online sophistication in the last 5 years, I think there really is a synergistic thing going on that is new, that is powerful, and we haven't wrapped our heads around very much at all yet. No longer do kids need to search for information. Do you know how out of date a Google search is? If you still go onto Google or Safari or something and type in, I want an answer to this or that, that is actually out of date, given the AI bots and the way information is now gathered. But not only is it out of date, because it's not about searching for information, the information is searching for them. It's out there looking for them, spying on them, targeting every single word, every scroll. It will measure to the millisecond when a young person pauses in a scroll just long enough and go, that got a 200th of a millisecond, greater stop rate than the other three. Feed a couple more of those in. And it literally works out algorithms with that level of sophistication. Constant theme I hear now from ASD youth who suddenly identify, and I mean suddenly in adolescence, as gender dysphoric is some version of how they've made a new friend or a new support group online who helped them understand, in fact, that they were gender diverse or trans. They had no idea. So thank God for those friendly online things that could help them figure it out. Think about this. AI doesn't have an agenda. All AI does is absorb stuff. All of the words, the posts, the position statements, the guidelines that have previously been produced around gender dysphoria by whatever organisation in whatever country you like, every single word has been gobbled up by AI. And it then identifies young people who go online and fit the descriptions of the angst, of the isolation, of the loneliness, of my body doesn't feel right, of I don't fit, I don't belong, this world isn't the right world for me. And all it does is match that then with all of the words that it's already got that might be offering a solution. No wonder they often end up with some form of gender diverse support or care or suggestion that might be why you as an ASD young person feel so disconnected from this world. And that's why you were told before, be careful what photos you take on your phone today, because it will figure out exactly where you are. I mean, this is the reality we live in. And it's the reality that young people live in probably more than us, although everywhere I go, most parents are stuck to their phone doom scrolling as well. And ASD young people in particular have always had an affinity for the online world because it is much easier to deal with social relationships at a distance and digitally than face-to-face and with eye contact and in the same room. So they're at much greater vulnerability for what is not just happening now, but what is coming around the corner, whether we're ready for it or not. I would say, like I alluded to before in my practice with gender diverse and ASD young people, I'd say 10 years ago, a majority or a significant minority of gender diverse young people were also meeting criteria for ASD. In recent years, there's definitely been a significant shift. And now I would say around 70% of the gender dysphoric diverse young people that I see either have ASD diagnosis or as I work with them, go on and definitely end up with an ASD diagnosis. Now, we worry about AI hallucinating, you know what that is, when it just comes up with the wrong thing. Sometimes I double check myself. I don't want to be hallucinating myself, seeing ASD where it's not, but when I work through a careful, methodical process, you'll see the increase in that co-occurrence is right in front of my eyes. Just an example of so many I could give, but there isn't time. Sam has been attending since he was 12 for ASD, social-related skills training, emotion regulation support training. At 15, his mood and behaviour suddenly declined. He was reluctant to talk about it until, and this is another interesting side point about consent, I gave him mature minor consent status so that he could make his own medical, including mental health decisions, and not have to share that with his parents. So with that greater privacy, he disclosed that he recently realised he was transgender. There was absolutely no history of gender incongruence in this young man's story whatsoever. When we explored this together further, he described how he had fallen in love, his words, with an online avatar, an anime character, who helped him understand his social difficulties, isolation from his peers, and his obsession actually with her, the online avatar, was because he was really a girl inside himself. And that then became quite a sticky black and white thought in his ASD brain, and he could only imagine getting onto medical intervention as soon as possible in order to fulfill his destiny, because the avatar had told him. So with young people, just I'll give you a very brief overview of what I do. At the moment, it's developing. I do a thing called gender diverse life skills, because who doesn't need life skills, right? All adolescents benefit from better life skills, and gender diverse life skills, they're just tailored a little more to that population, but certainly with the overlap with ASD young people, they become absolutely imperative. So it's neither gender affirming nor gender denying, because I'm just going to start where the young person's at. It treats their current gender identity as a mindset, which is what it is. A current gender identity is not set in stone or concrete. It's not necessarily going to be there forever. It's fluid, and it will change and it will mature. That's the way, roles go. We try to help them understand that and celebrate the idea of diversity under the rainbow, that there are so many different places that this journey could take you and that you could stop. It doesn't have to be this or that. It doesn't have to be one end or the other. It's not male or female, But the ASD brain is really attracted to that kind of black and white dichotomous thinking. So you've got to work extra hard to try and say there is actually some grey zones, or I prefer rainbow zones, that we can look at in there as well. The core target skills, understanding mindsets, both that they have a mindset and so do other people, flexible thinking, future thinking, sexed body thinking, independent critical thinking, and now we've added cyber hygiene. And of those, if I had to cut it down, I see flexible thinking, future thinking, sexed body thinking, and cyber hygiene as essential skills to develop with adolescents in these co-occurring categories before I would be confident really seeing them go anywhere near a medical intervention pathway. I won't go through the assessment checklist, but it's important and it needs to be comprehensive and updated on a regular basis. What I'll do is just, again, show you some of the bits and pieces that we would work through. I've talked about the foundations. The foundations apply to everybody, but now I'm going to talk about my favourite topics. Flexible thinking. What do we mean by that? It's that idea of not being black and white, all or nothing. It's the ability to tolerate, yeah, but what if? What if it didn't quite work out like that? What about the future? Which is future thinking, but it requires flexible thinking before you can get to future thinking. When there is an absolute absence of the ability to have flexible thinking, particularly around issues of gender and body decision making, then I don't think that young person is safely able to go on and make decisions that could have lifelong implications. Future thinking. We often come across this one with things like, what about having children one day? I'm never going to have children. I don't want to have children. I don't like children. That's your current mindset. Can you imagine maybe when you're 30, maybe the 30-year-old you might want to have children one day? No, I never want to have children one day. I don't like children. When you've got that level of pushback and that absolute lack of any form of flexibility or future thinking, I think it's my ethical responsibility to work my butt off to help that young brain develop whatever, emergence of flexibility and future flexibility that I can, because that is a gift that will serve them for the rest of their days. And when it's locked down and shut down, they're not in a safe position to make these kinds of decisions. And yet in Australia, at least, they wouldn't even be asked. It wouldn't even be a hurdle you'd be asked to jump over before you were given a prescription. Sex body integration and thinking, again, rarely brought into it, rarely talked about, and fundamentally important. I find particularly with the ASD co-occurrence cohort, can be something they're incredibly reticent to talk about. They don't like talking about bodies. They don't like talking about body parts. They certainly don't like talking about sex or romance or kissing or sexual attraction. But if you give them time and a safe place and start that psychoeducation, yourself completely comfortable with it, it is something that they will often then want to talk about a whole lot. And they're often the young people I find out who online, they would make you blush. They've already seen a whole lot. They've already encountered a whole lot, but certainly not in any sort of healthy stage developmental way that's going to bring them joy and fulfillment and the experience of having a sexed body in the future. That's why we talk about cyber hygiene, doing cyber audits. Again, when you've got confidence and trust with them and they'll tell you what they've been up to, it's so important. We set we set time budgets, check when they're using, get agreements, hopefully with family involved, about what those limitations look like, what kind of sites they will use, what they won't use. Try to have detox experiences. Do you know how hard it is to ask a young person in this day and age to detox off their device, even for 24 hours? I dare some of you to try it. It's worse than coffee or alcohol. And then just in finishing to sort of blow your minds a little bit, the emerging challenges that I'm working with are not just about gender identity type of diversity with this co-occurring group of young people, because identities have become all kinds of things. Now there's a significant number of young people who are furries. How many of you know furries? Good. So I won't explain it because you know what it is. What about therians? Much fewer of you. They believe that they have the spirit or soul of an animal, either in part or entirely. And this can manifest in various ways, including a feeling of a deep connection to a specific animal. And in ASD, this is quite common because we've had ASD people who identify with animals or act like cats or dogs almost out of the blue anyway. This is almost like a maturing and an advancement of that, where now it is the whole animal spirit that can take over. And it can take over. Otherkin, a bit like the therians, but they identify as non-human entities, which can include mythical creatures like dragons, elves, fairies, and they move into those identities and get lost in them. And then AI virtual partners. It's now typical of every major porn or mature dating app type site to offer the AI dating alternative, where you can not only create your avatar, you can create your, object of attractions avatar as well. It develops a personality, chats with you every day, can have virtual online sex with you. If you've got a VR headset, I'm told it's very realistic. Must try one day. It sounds fascinating. But this is the world that they're living in. This is their introduction not only to relationships and romantic talk, but to sex and sex gratification, such as it is. So we've got some amazing things happening with technology that are good. We've got some amazing challenges as clinicians working with young people who are in the middle of this mix right here and right now.